Welcome back to Unleashed at Work and Home, the podcast dedicated to helping pet professionals feel less stress and find more joy in their day-to-day lives. And today I am super excited that Kristin Buller, a veterinary social worker, has agreed to come and talk with me today about grief. Thank you, Kristin. Thanks for being here today.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
So veterinary social work, that's kind of a new field. Tell us a little bit about what that is and what that means.
Yeah, so veterinary social work is about, as social workers or clinicians, supporting the humans in the human-animal bond. And so there's advanced training we can get as social workers through University of Tennessee in this field. And so I have a certificate in veterinary social work that I got kind of post-masters. And there's several components of veterinary social work. Grief and loss is a big part of that. Compassion fatigue, conflict management is a big part of that. Animal-assisted therapy, and that is another big component. And then also the link between violence against animals and violence against humans is another area. So it's a very broad field, even within, kind of the uniqueness of it.
Yes, and all of those are very much needed. All elements of that, because I think that we're only just touching the surface of some of those connections and how they affect us and how they permeate many areas of our lives, even when we're thinking that they won't. And so we're going to talk today about grief. And I think that's true of grief too. We would all love to avoid grief. Yeah. We cannot avoid grief, but we all desperately would love to just skip that stage.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about that. So why is it something that we so desperately want to avoid?
I think it's so painful. It's something that's really, really difficult to journey through. I think as a culture, we don't have a lot of space for people who are going through grief because it's something we don't want to feel, but also we don't want people we love to be in pain. And part of grief is giving space to the pain. And so that can be a really hard thing to enter into ourselves, but also for the people around us to support. And then when it's related to pet loss, there's even more misunderstanding or lack of space within our culture, within our families sometimes around that. Yeah.
When I was working on my book for families about living with kids and dogs, one of the pieces that came up frequently was that the death of a pet could be much more painful than the death of a grandparent or someone because they are a part of your day-to-day life. They are part of what normal looks like. They're part of what coming home from the grocery store looks like. Yeah. And you may have adored spending time with your grandparent, but that was a special novel event.
Yeah.
And so you weren't feeling that pain every single day. Yeah. You walked through the door and the dog didn't greet you, or the cat wasn't sitting at the couch beside you, or whatever those pieces are.
Yeah, there's an intimacy of the connection we have with our animals and is different than what we have with any other human in our life, especially those that don't live in our household. And I think there's also something about that we have that connection with a creature that is not a human, but that we are able to bond with and communicate with and live life with. And I think then there's the caregiving part of it, where we're also caring for this being that depends on us for their well-being and also gives us so much in return, that a lot around making those final decisions, it's on us in a way that it's not with any of our human family in the same enormity.
Yeah. And that is all joyfully given and a heavy weight to bear at times.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about the effects on human behavior when we're experiencing grief.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think what I hear most often, and I do a lot of especially pet loss related grief work, is that it knocks people down. It bowls people over. It blindsides people with how intense they feel. And it can almost be scary of how all-consuming it is. I hear people talk about, I never knew I could cry this much. I didn't know I could wail like this. I didn't know I could make these kinds of sounds. And I think because we don't have a lot of space where we hear people talk about their grief experience, we don't have a lot of reference points of how normal that is.
Yeah.
Which I think is why going to pet loss support groups can be such a helpful experience, because you hear other people who are saying the exact same things from their own experience that resonate and can normalize it in a way too. But I think especially that initial, kind of like the immediate grief can have an intensity that really comes to then just basic self-care, like finding soft places to land, literally hydrating, like when you're crying that much, finding kind of what feels like the softness you need to have around you through that.
Yeah. And that can be hard to do. It can be
Yeah.
hard to give ourselves permission to
Yes.
feel what we're feeling, or to
Yeah.
recognize that we're just like not fully present in our brains or our
Yeah.
bodies during this
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. And that
It
it
adds
can
a
be
layer
such
to
a
it.
heart. Yeah, exactly. And I think for ourselves, there's a lot of self-judgment I hear from people, of a lot of the um, kind of, I shouldn't either, maybe I shouldn't be feeling this way, or I should be feeling something different than I am, or even externally, we give so much time for someone to grieve. And then we have this social pressure of getting back to something. It's just not the way grief is and how we experience it. And so you have to kind of like fight for your space at a time when you just need to be given the space, which is exhausting in itself too.
It is. It is. So what happens if we just, slap a Band-Aid on it and dive back in? Like, I'm fine, I'm fine. I don't need that space. What is likely to occur?
I mean, the thing about feelings is like they're still there. Like, even if we try to cover them up, they're going to come out one way or another. And so I think it's that balance of trying to find ways to move into the emotions and give them space and find what you need to feel like you're tending to yourself, while at the same time, there's this model within grief work called the dual process model, which is this idea of moving into the pain and into the sadness and finding ways through that at the same time of giving yourself space for integrating into what does life look like now, and some respite and some, if you find yourself stepping out of the grief, letting that be a restorative self-care experience so that you can go
Yes.
back into the grief. And that's not the same thing as not honoring it or not
Mm-hmm.
feeling it every single second. If you need to kind of give yourself space to watch a bad TV show where like for 27 minutes you don't cry, and then as soon as the credits start rolling, the tears are back. But some of that, just letting your body kind of recalibrate a little bit too, which sometimes people can feel like, either if they distract themselves from the grief, or even if they start to feel the pain less intensely as they move through grief, there can be a guilt and a sadness about that if they're not feeling the pain, they're not honoring who they've lost. And I think that pain and sadness and love can all be tangled together, and eventually the pain can soften, but the love and the bond doesn't end. And so I
Right.
think that's part of, what kind of moving through it can end up looking like.
Yeah, it can be a tough thing where thoughts and images and memories that are so painful in the early period of grieving then become treasured
Mm-hmm.
things to pull out and examine later, where
Yeah.
where before, the smell of cinnamon could just make you sob because it reminded you of someone, and then
Yeah.
after time you're like, oh, I love the smell of cinnamon
Yeah.
because it reminds me of,
Yeah.
or whatever these connections are. And that
Yeah.
that transition is not smooth and it's not measurable, and it
Yeah.
comes and goes,
Yeah.
but it does seem for most people to wind up there, where it's a
Yeah.
place of honoring the love, honoring
Yeah.
what had been, and the gifts that came from that,
Yeah.
even though the hard part of getting through that is so yucky.
Yeah. And I think comes and goes is such a good image. I have a lot of people who talk about, the waves of grief,
Mhm.
and that it's the grief experience isn't linear, and especially time linear. And a lot of it is, there's those memories that will surface, or something will happen, or oftentimes the first of anything. So the first holiday, the first season change, the first time you've done something since the
Yes.
loss. And especially with our pets, there's so many firsts. Like, it can just, I think that's why it can feel so overwhelming if it's the first time you come home from a trip, the first time you come home from work. And because we've done so many of those things so many times with them, the first isn't the last time you feel the wave
Right.
either. Like it,
Right.
but it kind of lets it feel a little more, I was going to say in some ways, like predictable pain, where it's like, okay, if I know this is how it feels when I come home, what are the ways I can create softness and understanding and care for myself as I'm walking through my door every evening or as I'm getting up in the morning?
And those ways will differ for each person, but are there some strategies that you suggest people start with when they're
Mhm.
reeling?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing is to, I also say, like, trust your heart more than your head. And so just knowing of whatever feels like it feels right is what is right for you. And the thing I hear most often is the disclaimer of, this sounds crazy, but this is what I'm doing, which I think is also why the groups are so helpful, because you'll have someone else who's like, oh, either me too, or this is what I'm doing. And so a lot of times it can be around um, either like turning something that was a daily routine with your pet into a ritual or a memory honoring way. So either in the mornings doing something in your morning routine that honors what you would have done with your pet in the morning, either saying something to them or putting a treat out for them or sitting, if you have a memorial or a shrine, kind of the same thing with the evening. If there's something that you can do that kind of creates space for their memory, that can be helpful. And I think also a lot of not doing something until you feel like you want to do it. So a lot of times that'll be around what to do with belongings or what to do with remains or ashes. And if there's any question of, I'm not sure yet, then you don't have to do anything. And you never have to there's no right or wrong, but kind of trusting your own inner compass, because it is so individual. Like what is soothing for one person might be the most distressing, and the flip is true too. And so just a lot of space for yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that can be maybe the trickiest when you're in a family system or with a partner and you're both grieving the same creature that you loved so much but have really different
Right.
needs. And so sometimes it's helpful to have a space where you can talk that through together of how to honor what the other person needs, but also not push someone farther than what they feel like is where they're at.
Yeah, that's definitely true, that different people grieving the same loss,
Yeah.
it isn't actually the same loss because it was
Yeah.
a unique relationship for each of them, and each of them
Yeah.
has their own ways of coping.
Yes.
That it can bump up with how can you do that? How can you think
Yeah.
that? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So for pet professionals, I think that this adds additional wrinkles because, of course, these are people who are very, very bonded to the animals in their lives, but they also, when working with a client, can sort of feel with the client some of
Yeah.
these thoughts and feelings and grief
Yeah.
in a way that someone who is more detached from animals and the connection that people have with them might
Mm-hmm.
not understand. So that the pet professionals wind up carrying not only their own losses, but those of other people too.
Mm-hmm. And oftentimes they're connected to the animals in their
Yeah.
care. So they're not only caring for the people caring for their animals, but they have cared for those animals sometimes for years and years and through really difficult illnesses. And yeah.
So what strategies do you suggest to help us,
Mm-hmm.
all of us, the pet professionals out here who would like to still be there very much for our clients, but not carry it,
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
help but not absorb?
Yeah. I mean, when I think of the piece of how to kind of be there with the pet owner as they're going through their grief process, if there can be a lot of space for validating their emotional experience, kind of providing support and validating just the difficulties and the complexities of the decision-making process that that person is in, and trying to help them have whatever experience feels the most meaningful for them around those end of life
Mm-hmm.
decisions. I think that is maybe the biggest thing I hear from like the pet owner side of what felt I don't even want to say positive is the wrong word, but made it like a softer experience, is when they felt like the professionals that were right there with them through the experience and honoring the difficulties and the pain. And so I think in terms of being able to give that out, also knowing that if you're a pet professional, you get to be the pet professional, and there are people like me who can then carry the other piece of the emotional part for clients. So having like referrals and kind of knowing within your area, either veterinary social workers or pet loss counselors or pet loss support groups, that oftentimes I'll have people reach out to me because it was their veterinarian office or dog trainer who said, hey, and I know someone who could talk with you more about that, which I think some people worry about, how do you refer someone to a counselor and all the stigma around mental health. But I think with pet loss, there's a different sense of, this is a real thing. There are people who are trained to help support you through this. I'm here. This is my role to support your pet and you through this part of the process. But I know it's bigger than what's happening in this room, and it's going to stick with you longer than the time we have to be together. So let me give you other supports. And if that can kind of lessen the load of what, as pet professionals, you have to carry or hold for people.
I like the way you said that. I'm trying to see if I can recap it, because I thought it was really thoughtful and nuanced. That the person is providing all of the support they can in the role for which they are trained.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's you're a vet tech and you're helping prepare a dog for euthanasia, or you're a dog trainer and you're helping someone through the decision of whether or not they're going to rehome a pet or euthanize a pet, or discussing some of these issues on a bigger level, that you don't have to take on the whole problem of what is beyond the part for which you were trained, and that by offering these resources and other support, you're acknowledging that this is absolutely real, completely valid, totally normal, and a little beyond my scope.
Yes. Yeah.
And that can be, I think, empowering at times, because what I've encountered with so many people that I have been coaching and working with in the community is that we lose sleep. We rehash conversations in our head. What if I could have done this differently? What if I had said that differently? Would they have felt better, felt less sad, carried less heartbreak? Any of those things, because we are wired to connect. We do care.
Yeah.
But it's a really tough load for so many pet professionals. And we know the turnover rate in the careers is very, very high.
Yeah.
Because people are struggling with the emotional load.
Yes. Yeah. And I think of that as a pet professional, where the purpose of the role itself is to help the animals, and the inherent hope is that it's help them live and help them thrive. And so then there becomes a whole different space around, what does death and dying look like, and how, when that's part of our identity to help someone, where do we kind of, how do we fit helping someone through that part of living, that I think can be really hard to not feel like, as a professional, that you've failed in some way, or that you've let them down, or that. And I think there's also the dynamic of, you can give the best care you can give. Sometimes the disease wins, whatever that is. And there's also a financial reality for people. That is a big part of being able to continue care or access care. And I think pet professionals end up in a really difficult situation of needing to be the communicators about some of the financial realities, and then dealing with, where people are at financially, if they can do that or not, or feel able to do that, and kind of all that can churn up in a lot of difficult.
That churns up a lot. I've had many conversations with people about that, because I've had some people who are frustrated because they know they could have saved the animal if only the resources had been available, financial resources had been available. And then I've had people talk about how they really earn very little in their roles as pet professionals. And so they completely understand the client just losing it, and that they would love to be able to pay, and they think it's worth what the cost is. But they don't have it. They don't have that money.
Yeah.
And then life and death decisions are being made based
Yeah.
on money. And that's a real tough thing. But
Yeah.
a flip side of this is that I think in some ways we navigate death a little bit better with some of our pets than we do with humans.
Mm,
That we sometimes look a little bit more on what is compassionate and what is
yeah.
quality of life.
Yeah.
And from the human perspective, I think um, I have a nephew who's in med school. No, he's not in med school. He's a resident. I get my words confused. He'll be appalled. But that he is working in the ICU of Duke Medical
Mhm.
Center. And so the people there are very, very ill. And a lot of them don't survive. And he said, like, the last weeks and months can be horrible, horrible. And that for our pets, frequently we are able to weigh the how can I give you a good
Yeah.
last little bit, whatever that bit is, even if it's a
Yep.
shorter bit, how can I make this a beautiful shorter bit?
Yeah.
um, because we will all die. Our
Hmm.
pets will die and our human loved ones will die and we ourselves will die. And
Yeah.
the more we can try to make that a normal piece of
Yeah.
and an experience and
Yeah.
make it as positive as possible,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
value there.
Yeah. And kind of like you said, kind of as beautiful and comforting and focused on it being a reflection of the love that we have.
Yeah.
This is, yeah, it's kind of like the final act of caring that
Hmm.
can relieve pain, even as it then asks us to take on more pain
Yeah.
by providing that care. And
Yeah. A dog trainer said to me, I, oh dear, I'm going to miss her quote. And I thought it was so beautiful. Um, I really enjoyed the love, the experience, so I won't begrudge the grief, you know. And
mm-hmm.
so she's like, when she feels it, she just leans in and
Yeah,
goes, you know, this was an awesome relationship and it gave
yeah,
me so much. And so it just makes me teary. But
yes,
the whole
right,
piece of like that we don't want that grief. We, you know,
yeah,
no, no, no. But the only reason we have it is because there was something there
yeah,
worth grieving.
yep. The depth of the bond will be the depth of the
Yeah.
grief. But
Yeah.
it's kind of the other, yeah, the other side of the coin of loving so deeply. And I think with our animals, we love deeply in a way that is, it's just different than any human
No
relationship we
barriers.
have. Exactly. Yeah, there's a pureness to it, and
Yeah. We drop all of those, you know,
yeah,
emotional barriers and then we're like, "Oh my
yeah.
gosh, they snuck in there. That was bad."
Yes, yeah, exactly. Literally wiggled their way in.
Well, this has been a very interesting conversation about grief, and it is a difficult topic. So I'm really grateful to have someone to talk to about it, because I think this is one of the biggest challenges that pet professionals face,
Yeah,
that there's so much grief.
yeah,
What do we do with it?
yeah,
And the toughen up, stuff it down
mhm,
philosophies don't work.
yeah,
And that is unfortunately what so many people are trying to do.
yeah, yeah.
Well, if people want to learn more about you and your work, how could they do that?
Yeah, feel free to check out my website. I have some resources, information on there, and it's an easy way to contact me, just kristinbuller.com. Um, and I'll also, yeah, there's a couple of different grief books that I found really helpful and had other people talk about. There's one by another veterinary social worker, Enid Transden, that's called The Pet Loss. I'll have to look at the title to make sure I get it right, but it's a The Pet Remembrance Journal, I think is the title. And it's part memory book, part grief workbook,
Hmm.
specifically around pet loss. So that can be a nice space if you're trying to kind of work through some things on your own, especially if it feels like there's things I don't want to forget, but also there's a way I want to kind of be able to journal through things. Um, there's another grief book I just finished reading called It's Okay That You're Not Okay.
Yeah.
That's about grief in general. And I read it thinking of my pet loss folks and found it to really resonate, I think, with what people are going through. And so that's another one that's out there right now. And I think just finding community, finding other people who are going through grief in real time at the same time as you. There's a way that you're able to support each other and hear each other that's just different than even the people around you in your orbit might be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for pet professionals to find support, both to be able to give to your clients or the people that you're helping, but also to know that if you need your own support through that, you know, to resource, even if it's those same professionals for yourself or your staff, or within veterinary social work, there's something called rounds, where sometimes a vet social worker will come into a practice and just do kind of a debrief group or a decompressing around, especially if there's been a more difficult
Yeah.
case or something, you know, and kind of knowing that there's options as professionals for processing your feelings as well, and that you don't just have to be the helper, but you can also be cared for yourself, because it is a lot.
It is. It really is. And I think you've shared a lot of very helpful information today, Kristin. I'll make sure we link everything in the show notes so people can find
Oh,
those books and resources. Very, very helpful. Thank you so much for coming on Unleashed today.
thank you.
Okay, so that's the first one. Do you have time to do just a quick little blurb for the
Yeah,
group?
yeah.
Okay.
Sure thing.
So there's two questions, and I'm going to reintroduce you because it's a whole separate clip.
Gotcha.
So, um, hi, I am here today with Kristin Buller, a veterinary social worker, and I'm asking her our bonus question. So, Kristin, thanks so much for joining us. Can you tell me something that has helped you feel stronger or more resilient that other people might want to try?
I mean, and maybe it's the therapist in me, but I think just connecting with others who are going through whatever it is I'm going through, whether it's transitioning to being a new mom or finding other therapist colleagues or other people who have dogs with behavior problems, or, you know, whatever it is that I've, either been struggling with or transitioning to or excited about. I think the power of relationship,
Yeah.
finding your people and whatever that looks like for you. Yeah.
I think that is one of the main things that helps people feel better. And it's fascinating that it's the first thing we jettison when we're stressed. Like, I
Yeah.
don't have time for that. I
Yep.
don't have time to go out to dinner with a friend or go to a support group meeting or anything that's human connection.
Yep.
And it's the thing that makes us feel the most better.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. That is awesome. Thank you. And so if you were to have a wish for pet professionals, what would that be? So if I give you the sentence stem, my wish for you is, how would you complete that?
I think it'd be along the same lines, that my wish for you would be that there is space and time and energy to carve out for yourself those connections and the space to either reach out or nurture or be cared for by the people in your orbit, or finding people to be in your orbit and feeling like there's this sense of being held within a bigger community than feeling all alone in whatever it is you're going through or dealing with.
Yeah, that is beautiful. Thank you so much, Kristin.
Sure thing.